see the daily stuff that's churned out from like 8:30.
Okay, everyone. For those of you who are with us and those who are still joining, welcome tonight to the sixth and final lesson in the course. 6 weeks ago, we embarked on a journey. We called it the Journey of the Soul. And for the past 5 weeks, we have discussed various aspects of death. In the first week, we spoke about the fear of death, explaining how the natural and humanly instinctive fear of dying is mitigated in some way by the Jewish perspective on life and on death. We learned that the soul is the real me and that it's eternal. And when the real me departs from its physical container, it heads back to its natural spiritual home, where it experiences great pleasure. In the second week, we discussed what happens to the soul at the time of death and in the weeks and the months that follow. In the third week, we discussed how we respond to death and the various mourning rituals that we go through. In the fourth week, we discussed where the soul goes to after death, the concepts of Gehenna and Gan Eden. In the fifth week, we discussed how the soul can return after death and discussing the principle of Gilgul HaNeshamot, reincarnation. At the very onset of this whole journey, I said that although this course is ostensibly about death and about the afterlife, in fact, what we hoped to learn from this course was intended to impact and even redefine our time here in this world. So tonight's lesson has a twofold purpose. First of all, to focus on how the awareness of death and of mortality, and particularly the ability to talk about death without fear or anxiety, can help us to lead a more meaningful and a more fulfilled life. And then secondly, after we've moved through that, which is shorter than in previous weeks, we're going to summarize and bring to conclusion what we've learned over the past weeks. Here is the essence of what we learned in lesson number 1. The soul is a real me, and it's eternal. The body is a temporary container for the soul. And the soul experiences great pleasure back in its native habitat. One outcome of overcoming, or at the very least alleviating, the fear of death is that we no longer have to ignore it or deny it or struggle against it. In fact, it's actually a liberating force in our lives. We're free to contemplate our mortality. And if we're able to do that without suffering anxiety and heart palpitations, it's going to allow us not just to see death, but to see our lives now in a different perspective. And this was noted by a psychologist called Robin Walser in the first text for tonight in your workbooks on page 212, text number 1. And I wonder whether anybody would care to read it for us to kick off tonight's session.
Could I read it, Shlomo?
Please do.
212, you said?
Yes.
Yes.
Text 1.
211.
Be agitated and do not sin.
No, there's no exercise or reflection as potent. It's text number 1.
Yes, sorry.
211 then.
There is no exercise or reflection as potent, perhaps, as contacting one's ending. In confronting our own passing, we are better able and more willing to help others see the power of awareness of that which is inevitable, death, helping us to wake up to the tender colors of life and personal creation. In contemplating your own end, we recognize that there is still time for life in whatever time is left. Values are there to be lived until that last inevitable moment, to acknowledge this is freeing.
And as a matter of fact, a study that was undertaken in 2015 actually found that thinking about death can produce positive results in people's thinking and behavior. It found a direct correlation between a positive attitude to one's eventual death with, in the first instance, increased attention to one's health. Secondly, being less prone to taking risks. And thirdly, an eagerness to obey rules. Some of this is in your workbooks, but we'll show it to you on a slide. Here are the benefits of contemplating mortality. It helps us to prioritize and to retain focus. We're going to talk about this more. It helps us make all the wrong mistakes in our lives. It helps us to seize and embrace every moment, which we're going to talk about more. It helps us to live life more fully. And if life is more meaningful, it's not just functional. So let's take a look at how the awareness of death can deal with the first of these over here, to prioritize and to focus on life. We're going to start this with a biblical text from the book of Psalms and the way in which the Talmud chooses to interpret it. So we're going to turn to, let me just unmute this, please. So I've just muted everyone. Okay, we're going to turn to text number 2a on page 212. It's a short one. I'll read it to you. Says King David in Psalms, "Be agitated and do not sin. Verbalize within your hearts upon your beds and be forever silent." Well, King David is writing poetry, and like a lot of poetry, you don't understand what he's talking about. So the Talmud steps in and it explains what King David is saying. And that's in text 2b, which is on page 213. Would somebody like to read that? Loretta, I can see you on the screen. Perhaps you'd read that for us.
I'll read it if nobody else is.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
Loretta was going to read it. Go for it, Loretta.
Sorry, Loretta can read it.
It's okay. We should always agitate our good inclination against our evil inclination, as it is stated. Be agitated and do not sin. If this vanquishes the evil inclination, all is good. But if not, we should occupy ourselves with Torah study, as it is stated. Verbalize Torah teachings until they enter within your hearts. If this vanquishes it, all is good. But if not, we should recite the Shema, as it is stated, upon your beds. If this vanquishes it, all is good. But if not, we should remind ourselves of the day of death, as it is stated, and be forever silent.
Well, that was an attempt by the Talmud to try and explain those few verses that in Psalms. It's probably left you more confused than when we started. So let me just explain what this is talking about. The first thing is to understand that this reference to the evil inclination is not necessarily evil. Most times, it's just plain distracting. It distracts us from our primary focus, and that's why we refer to it as evil. And as everybody knows, it's very easy to be distracted. And what this piece of Talmudic commentary is saying is that when all other attempts to focus fail, reading the Shema or trying to study Torah, whatever, if all other attempts to focus in our lives fail, contemplating our eventual death helps us to prioritize and to remain focused on what is really important and of lasting value, that which is eternal and not that which is here today and gone tomorrow. And this in turn will lead us to avoid mistakes and bad choices, some of which, as we all know, lead us to some of the cul-de-sacs in our lives from which it's very difficult to extricate ourselves. And to explain this concept over here, we're going to show you our first video tonight. We have a number of videos tonight. And here is the first one.
Dynamite, from the ancient Greek term for power, is a potent material indeed. But a person can hardly encounter a more powerful motivator to plan for his day of death than the opportunity to read his own obituary in the media. Alfred Nobel was a 19th century Swedish chemist and engineer with 350 different patents. He owned 90 factories that manufactured armaments and was the inventor of dynamite. His brothers Ludwig and Robert Nobel were tycoons with oil fields along the Caspian Sea. Alfred invested in his brother's enterprise and he grew ever wealthier. Then, in 1888, Ludwig Nobel died suddenly while on a visit to Cannes, France. The passing of one of the Nobel magnates was exceptionally newsworthy. In their haste to hammer out the headlines, the French newspapers misidentified the deceased, mistakenly reporting that Alfred Nobel had died. Alfred was shocked to read of his own passing. He was deeply disturbed at the far from flattering obituaries. Bold black headlines screamed, "The Merchant of Death is dead." The fine print was no better. Dr. Alfred Nobel, who became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before, died yesterday. Alfred was sobered by an experience afforded few. Is this how I will be remembered when my time comes, he wondered? Will I be forever tainted as the Merchant of Death? Historians speculate that Alfred, determined to improve his genuine obituary by improving his lasting effect on humanity, took steps while still hale and hearty to ensure that mankind would remember him as an everlasting contributor to the advance of civilization and quality of life. On November 27, 1895, Alfred Nobel signed his last will and testament, designating 94% of his vast fortune to the creation of the Nobel Prizes. To this day, his name is synonymous with the advance of science, medicine, literature, and world peace. All it took to transform a merchant of death into an angel of progress and peace was a moment of serious reflection on mortality and its consequences.
I wonder how many of you knew that story, but that's illustrating the idea of the way in which contemplating death can actually make a difference to our lives. You know, we're all aware of where we're headed, but that fuzzy awareness alone doesn't quite do the trick. We occasionally need to reflect on the idea of death in order to remain truly focused on a life that's meaningful and a life which is of value. This, by the way, is not to suggest for a moment that we should walk around depressed and feeling utterly worthless. It's telling us that just occasionally there needs to be a reality check, because often we're just so caught up in our lives, so caught up in all the stuff which is going on and the competitive dimension of our lives, that we just need to be reminded sometimes that our existence actually runs a lot deeper than just material success and pleasure. And realizing that can actually be an extremely liberating thought. I don't know whether you've ever heard the expression, maybe we're all too old, YOLO. YOLO is an acronym used by young people. It stands for You Only Live Once, YOLO. And it's a catchword which has become really popular in youth culture and music. And it implies that one should enjoy life, even if it entails taking risks or defying conventions. It's kind of like the other term that we'll all be more familiar with, called the bucket list, the wish list of the things that we'd like to do before we kick the bucket, which is why it's called the bucket list. And these concepts come from a sense of urgency that results from contemplating our mortality. But with one major difference between these two concepts and our Jewish concept. Because YOLO, or bucket list philosophy, is that because we're all going to die, nothing is of importance. So let's do all the things that we want so we can enjoy life to the most, however we're going to do it. The Jewish view is actually the polar opposite. Because we all die, we should focus only on matters that are permanent and eternal and that are important. And you can bet your bottom dollar that none of these will be found on your average bucket list. So to emphasize just once again, all of this is contingent upon the ability to take moments to consider our mortality with equanimity and without an enormous sense of dread. And that's really one of the things we've been working on for the past few weeks. By the way, the thoughts that people have when they're dying, as they stare at their own mortality, is, I suppose those are the moments when you really think about, the things which are important. And by the way, on an Appendix B of your booklets, there is a reading from a nurse who recorded the regrets of people she cared for in their final days. And it's really informative. We're going to move straight on now to our meditation for tonight. Once again, I shall take myself out of the frame so that you can see it on a nice big screen.
For our meditation reflection for this final lesson of the Journey of the Soul course, we're going to take a meditation straight from our sages, from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, which tells us to meditate upon three things. Imagine, if you will, that there's an eye that sees, an ear that hears, and all of your deeds are written in a book. Now, that's something that for centuries would have taken imagination. But in our day and age, it doesn't take any imagination at all, because we know that everything is seen, heard, and recorded. What we're going to do now is imagining ourselves at the end of our lives in the editing room, so to speak, with all the footage, all of the film, all of the recordings, every moment of our lives. It's there for review, to rewatch, to relive. Imagine yourself now looking back through your life, watching the real-time movie of every single second. See yourself in every place where you've been, every person you've ever met, even if you passed them in an elevator for 5 seconds. And now, let's start to edit and form our highlight film. And of course, what does a highlight film mean? Now that the soul has left the body, the highlights are not which restaurants I ate at or where I went on vacation. The soul now has moved on from a body. The highlights are, what good did I do in this world? Who did I love? Who did I help? Start to imagine your life. Start to reflect on the real highlight film. those small fleeting moments that were over in seconds, but last forever. Who did you affect? Who did you help? How did you make the world a better place? And now realize that we're not editing just yet. We're still filming. We're still making the movie. Imagine yourself now, you're still filming the movie. Visualize it. You're in the director's chair. What scene will you direct? We'll take a moment to visualize and reflect.
Wow, what a thought. So what we've been saying until now is that the realization, excuse me, that the day will come when all our actions and our accomplishments are going to be divided between meaningful and utterly worthless, helps us to prioritize in our lives what's important. That is what comes from reflecting on mortality and the fact that we're going to die one day. Now we're going to focus on another point entirely. Contemplating the inevitability of death and the fact that it can happen at any moment increases our urgency to take maximum advantage of every moment. Here is a question. What do you consider of greater value? Your time or your money? Now, I'm pretty certain that most of you are going to respond that time is the more precious of the two commodities. So then I'll ask you another question. If you believe that time is more important than money, are you living your life in a manner that is consistent with that answer? Because the reality is that most of us don't live by this truth. And that's the gist of a little Jewish aphorism that I'll read in Hebrew so that you can hear the rhyme. It's on page 215, it's text number 3. And I'll read it in English because it's very short. So the Hebrew reads as follows. Adam doeg al ibud damav, ve'eno doeg al ibud yamav. Damav enam ozrim, yamav enam chozrim. It's Hebrew poetry. Folks fret over a lost dime and fail to fret over lost time. But money provides no reprieve, while time is impossible to retrieve. Works better in Hebrew, but it's not bad. Let's see this in the following little clip. I've cracked a new technology tonight. I've found a way to embed a YouTube video clip into a PowerPoint presentation. Watch this. I hope it works.
Hey, Bud. Bud.
Huh?
Got a match?
Match? Yes, I have one right here.
Don't make a move. This is a stick-up.
What?
You heard me.
Mister, put down that gun.
Shut up. Now, come on. Your money or your life? Look, Bud. I said your money or your life. I'm thinking it over.
That's a very famous clip from Jack Benny, of course. So if I give you an ultimatum, either waste a day, which you can spend watching TV or Netflix, whatever you want in bed, or pay £1,000, what are you going to choose? How many of you would respond that you'll pay £1,000 to waste a day in bed? In other words, your money is more important than your time. Bit of trickery there, isn't there? There's an economic term which is called fungible, Fungible. If an item is fungible, it means that it can easily be exchanged for another identical item. So money is fungible. £1 is pretty much the same as another pound. Cans of soup are fungible because there's no real difference between them. If you have borrowed a can of soup, you don't have to bring back the same can. People aren't fungible. You can't drop off your child at daycare and bring another child home, sadly. And moments of time are not fungible. They are not exchangeable. So if that's the case, why do we care more about money than about wasted time? To begin to answer this question, we're going to look at a short midrashic statement, which is on page 216 in text number 4. Again, it's very short, so I'll read it. If not for our fear of the angel of death, what wrongs we would commit against our Father in heaven. And we can follow up this idea, the same idea, but expressed in a different way by Rabbi Steve Jobs. I bet you didn't know that Steve Jobs was a rabbi, did you? Okay. It's another YouTube clip, and I need to move somewhere towards the middle of it to the part that I want to play, because the whole of it is too long. And so forgive me if it takes me just a few moments to get to where I want, because my screen is very small and I can't actually see the minutes, but I know that it's at 1 minute 40.
If I had never that they quote that went something like, if you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly. If you live each day as if you is about death. When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, if you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right. It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now, the new is you. But someday, not too long from now, you will truly become the old and be cleared away. Sorry to be so dramatic, but it's quite true. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary.
Wise words. We're still trying to find out why money is more important than time. You know, when you read the Bible and you read about the first generations, they were blessed with an incredible abundance, remarkable longevity, you know, people living for 900 years. And yet they didn't appreciate what they had because they had so much of it. And most importantly, for our discussion tonight, they didn't value their time in this world. Imagine that you could live for 800 or 1,000 years, all in good health. You know, would actually self-destruct because of that longevity. Death frames the importance of life and the need to fully seize and embrace every moment. When life is short, everything matters. There's a very famous responsa that was sent to the 16th century rabbi, great halachist, Rabbi David ben Ibn Zimra. It came from a Jew who was in prison and was destined to be in prison pretty much for the rest of his life. He was granted 1 day of freedom a year. And this prisoner writes to the rabbi and asks him to guide him which day in the year is the most important. And he asks, is it perhaps Yom Kippur? Or might it be Purim, which celebrates such a big salvation? Could it be Pesach, because it is the festival of celebrating freedom? The rabbi writes back to him and says, choose the very first occasion that is possible, because every single day is precious. Don't wait for Yom Kippur or Purim or Pesach. Life is too short. Today is precious. And the fact of the matter is that despite the fact that human lifespan has been so drastically reduced, we still tend to avoid contemplating mortality because we live as if we're always going to be here. We just live with an endless succession of goals, the next thing on which we're going to focus. You know how it works. When you're young, you focus on your 5th birthday, your 6th birthday, and then your bar mitzvah, your bat mitzvah, then about high school, and then about graduating, and then about university, if you're going to go to university. Then your next goal is your job, and within your job, There's going to be all kinds of other goals that you're going to try and achieve. And of course, there's marriage, and then there's family, and you want to achieve all of that as well, and there's professional qualifications that you want to achieve. And it's just, and by the time you get older than that, you start thinking, if only I could stay alive until my next grandchild's bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, another goal. And we keep ourselves going with those goals. But we behave as if we're going to live forever. And that's particularly true for those of us who live, blessed to live, in countries that have strong security and good health care. So why do we care more about money than about wasted time? Because we carry with us an illusion of immortality. Time is dispensable because there's always going to be more of it. And that's why so many of us procrastinate and postpone important matters. Part of what stops us from resolving things today is that there's always a tomorrow. And why push something off until tomorrow? Why do it tomorrow? Because there's always going to be the day after. But what if there's no day after tomorrow? What would we do then? What would we regret? So when we are aware of death, when death is acknowledged and appreciated as a natural stage of life, something that we don't have to be afraid of, we live differently. Ignoring death is not healthy because it disconnects us from the finitude of life, which then disconnects us from what life is truly all about. Thinking about death is not necessarily the outgrowth of a morbid fascination. The point we're trying to make again and again and again is that a healthy attitude towards morbidity, towards death, allows us to live our lives more fully by recognizing that we need to make the most of our lives and that every moment is precious. And in addition to the fact that life is short, we actually have no idea when our final date will be. There is a wonderful interaction between one of our great sages in the Talmud, Rabbi Eliezer, and his disciples. He turns around to them one day and he says, you know what, guys? You only have to repent, you only have to do teshuvah one day before you die. Everybody's really pleased. Well, that lets us off the hook. And then one chochem, one clever student, puts up his hand, says, excuse me, but how do we know when we're going to die? Ah, says the rabbi. That's why it's better to do teshuvah, to repent every day, just in case. So our immediate needs, our social structures, all distract us from thinking about our mission here in this world. But people who live with a sense of urgency take the daily protocol of our lives less seriously. Our mortality gives us urgency to make our lives meaningful, not just functional. And the next slide shows us the consequences of avoiding mortality. Our focus is on selfish desires and aspirations. Time becomes dispensable. There's procrastination. There's disconnection from what life is truly about. And there's distraction from our true mission. And all of this was expressed very poignantly by a little Jewish boy from Michigan who is named Miles, and I have to be careful with his surname because it is spelled Levin. And I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't know whether to pronounce it as Levin or Levine, because I don't even know how to pronounce my own surname. In this country, we're Levin. Back in South Africa, we're Levine, but strictly speaking, grammatically, you're only a Levine when you've got an E on the end. At any rate, in June 2005, this 16-year-old boy was diagnosed with a very rare pediatric cancer. And he began to post updates online in order to appraise his family and his friends on developments relating to his illness. And very sadly, he passed away 2 years later in August 2007, 6 days short of his 19th birthday. On the 7th of July, shortly before 7th of July 2005, when he was diagnosed, this is what he wrote. And I'd like someone, please, to read us this beautiful piece on page 217 with text number 5.
Could do it, Sean, if you want.
Thank you.
I went to the driving range the other day and I was thinking how you start out with a big bucket of golf balls and you just start hitting away carelessly. You have dozens of them. Each individual ball means nothing, so you just hit, hit, hit. One ball gone is practically inconsequential when subtracted from your bottomless bucket. There are no practice swings or technique re-evaluations after a bad shot because so many more tries remain. You eventually have to reach down towards the bottom of the bucket to scavenge for another shot, and you realize that tries are running out. Now, with just a handful left, each swing becomes more meaningful. The right technique becomes more crucial. So between each shot, you take a couple of practice swings and a few deep breaths. There's a very strong need to end on a good note, even if every preceding shot was horrible. Getting it right at the end means a lot. You know, as you tee up your last ball, this is my final shot. I want to crush this with perfection. I must make this count. Limited quantities or limited time brings a new precious value and significance to anything you do. Live every day shooting as if it's your last shot. I know I have to. I found out today 5-year survival rates are just 30%.
And indeed, he didn't make it to 5 years. He managed just 2. That's Miles Levine. I think he taught us something. The bottom line is life is too short to hold grudges. Life is too short to worry. And let me ask you this question and just pipe up one at a time. What else is life too short for?
To stuff a mushroom.
For what, sorry?
You may not know that one. There's a book, Life is Too Short to Stuff a Mushroom.
Yes, okay, right.
Regrets.
Stuff a mushroom.
Regrets.
Regrets.
What
Yeah,
else?
it's
Bear grudges.
Bear grudges. What else?
Wasting time.
Yeah, and?
Too short not to be with loved ones.
Yeah,
To argue.
yeah,
Feel ashamed.
yeah,
To concentrate on money too much.
yeah,
to not reach out to people who you care about, but don't get round to.
yeah.
To tell people that you love them.
Yeah. Anything else? They're all good.
To enjoy it.
Enjoy it, yes.
And to not be Bruegger's.
You know what they say about Bruegger's? You know how they say that a dog's not just for Christmas? Well, I heard it once said that a Bruegger's is not just for a Simcha.
Rabbi, I thought that when you have dementia at the end, you forget absolutely everything except all your broiguses.
I know, terrible, isn't it? I'm going to read you a story, okay? It's a nice story. Schmerl failed miserably at everything. He couldn't, Schmerl, yes. He couldn't sell stereos because everyone else was buying iPods. And then when he started selling hats, suddenly they went out of style. His tailoring didn't measure up. His accounting didn't add up. Whatever he did flopped. One day, after being fired from yet another job, he saw a message in his inbox which read, "Trip to Diamond Island. Diamonds are plentiful. The only cost is the voyage." Well, it sounded just too good to be true, almost like the email from the wife of the deceased tycoon in Nigeria who had chosen you to give all of her husband's money to. But he contacted the number in the email, and the guy on the other end seemed genuine enough. He tossed the idea back and forth in his mind, and finally he mustered enough nerve to tell it to his wife, who was hugely frustrated at her husband's constant unemployment. She thought it was another pipe dream at first, but then figured, what the heck, it's worth a try. So she pawned off something else in the house, and he bought himself a ticket. Throughout the trip, Schmerl looked out at the sea, trying to get a glimpse of this wondrous island. And then finally it came into view. It was glistening. It was literally shining in the bright sun. He rushed off the ship when it docked, and he could not believe his eyes. Everywhere he looked, he saw diamonds. The beach didn't have sand, only diamonds. He scooped up 2 handfuls, he stuffed them in the pockets of his worn-out old brown suit. And then he realized that he was hungry. So with his pockets loaded with his newfound wealth, he went off to the first strip he saw, and he walked into a real classy restaurant. He sat himself down, he ordered the most expensive items on the menu. It was the first time in his life he had ever been able to treat himself this way, and the food was delicious. When the waiter brought him the bill, it was a small fortune. But magnanimously, he pulled out a small diamond from his pocket and he told the waiter, "Keep the change." The waiter stood there dumbfounded. Schmerl encouraged him to take it. And don't worry, he said, I can afford it, it's okay. And then the waiter explained that diamonds were worthless. On this island, they were so plentiful that anyone could go out and get a scoop of the pretty stones. But you couldn't buy lunch with that. With a sinking feeling, Schmerl asked what type of currency would be acceptable. The waiter told him that the prime currency on this island was schmaltz, rendered chicken fat. Chickens were very rare. Schmaltz was even rarer, and people literally hoarded the stuff. But I don't have any schmaltz, protested Schmerl. The waiter wasn't sure what to do. So he spoke to the manager, who insisted that Schmerl at least work off his bill in the restaurant kitchen. Wonder of wonders, the same Schmerl who had failed at everything else did a wonderful job in the kitchen. He was industrious and ingenious, and in no time he'd worked his way up from dishwasher to main chef and to manager, and then he bought the place, and he had quite a stash of schmaltz, and he invested in opening another restaurant on the other side of the island. And then he branched out into real estate, into property, and then another business. And in a short time, Schmerl was well-to-do, and he had earned his fortune in chicken schmaltz. It was finally time to head home and to share the wealth with his family. So he sold all of his successful enterprises, and he placed his many loaded and locked chests of schmaltz onto a ship heading back home. On the island, they kept the schmaltz in underground vaults where it was cool in the hot sun in the open sea, the schmaltz began to spoil and the chests had a tremendously foul odor. But Schmerl was rich and happy without a care in the world. And when he arrived, he was greeted by his wife and children, all eager to see the many suitcases of diamonds. Schmerl laughed at them. You don't understand. He said, I learned on Diamond Island that diamonds are really worthless. Instead, he told them, I tell you what I brought home. I brought enough schmaltz for us to be able to live with great wealth all of our lives. They thought he had gone completely with sugar. It lost his mind. Seeing the shocked faces of his family, Schmerl gradually recalled that the whole purpose of his journey had been to bring home diamonds. But once he had reached Diamond Island, he had been sidetracked and distracted by what was valuable there, forgetting that chicken schmaltz would have no value once he came home. He searched frantically among his belongings, and he found his old brown suit and with a couple of scoopfuls of diamonds still inside the pockets. A few more diamonds clung to the bottom of his greasy chests. And then he realized that what had seemed useless on Diamond Island was a real treasure. What a shame he had not collected more while he had the chance. And how fortunate he was that he'd managed unthinkingly to bring a few diamonds back home. And so, despite the lost opportunities and all of the distractions, we managed to pick up a few diamonds along the way. Perhaps one forgotten in a pocket, a few diamonds at the bottom of the chest, and those few diamonds make the whole trip worthwhile. The soul enters the world on a mission to collect diamonds. But it's hard to remember the diamonds when everyone else is busy with schmaltz.
Very good.
Well, we've been talking about how time is precious and how we need to make the most of it. But because most of us who are sharing these sessions are probably in this second, I say most but not all, are probably in the second half of our lives, it's worthwhile just talking about what happens as we get older. Because there comes a time in all of our lives when we want to slow down and we want to take things a bit easier. And the question then is, what is the Jewish view on aging? So let me first of all give you the bad news for tonight. I'm afraid that retirement is not part of the Jewish lexicon. As we'll soon see, there are times in our lives when we make a transition, but we never retire. Text number 6 on page 220. Somebody care to read it, please?
Shall I read that?
Sure.
Rabbi Yehoshua stated, those who are married in their younger decades should nevertheless remarry in their old age. Those who had children while they were young should continue to have children in their older years. So it is stated, sow your seed in the morning, and do not withhold your hand in the evening, for you do not know which will prosper, whether this one or that, or whether they will be equally good. Rabbi Akiva stated, those who studied Torah in their youth should continue to study in their old age. Those who had disciples in their younger years should continue to have disciples in their seniority. So it is stated, sow your seed in the morning, etc.
So what this text says to us is that if something is good and worthwhile doing, it's worthwhile doing even when you're older. There's plenty of time to relax in the afterlife. And this life is for working, for completion, for achieving. Because ultimately, we're only happy so long as we're productive. Because that's why God created us. And why he gave us the days that he blessed us with. And that, by the way, is one of the reasons why retired people have higher rates of depression than the working population. There's a newspaper article, which we're going to read now, that describes just how bad retirement is for your health. It's text number 7 on page 221. A reader, please. Somebody hasn't read yet.
I'll read.
Thank you.
Retirement can cause a drastic decline in health, according to a new study. Research by the IEA found that both mental and physical health can suffer after retirement. The study, Work Longer, Live Healthier, the relationship between economic activity, health, and government policy, shows there is a small boost in health immediately after retirement, but that over the long term, there is a significant deterioration. It suggests retirement increases the likelihood of suffering from clinical depression by 40%, and the chance of having at least one diagnosed physical condition by about 60%. The probability of taking medication for such a condition rises by about 60% as well, according to the findings. People who are retired are 40% less likely than others to describe themselves as being in very good or excellent health.
And so if you really want to get totally depressed about this, I invite you to look at figure 6.1 on page 222 at some time, which goes through each of the categories, and you can see just how bad retirement is for your health. But I think we've depressed you enough, so we're not going to do that together in the class, okay? But here is some slides that simply sum this up. Retirement increases the likelihood of physical health decline and mental health decline. And that, by the way, is the flip side of all of our kvetching about work. Because as it turns out, our work or productivity is hugely important for our happiness and for our sense of fulfillment. So what are we to do if and when, whether due to circumstances within or outside our control, what happens when we find ourselves out of work? And the answer is that over the years, we gain expertise and experience in many areas. And those gifts are meant to be used for the good of society, even after the time of traditional retirement. In a young world, there's still space for older people. Now, it's true that as we age, sometimes we are no longer physically capable of doing those things that we were capable of doing when we were in our physical prime. That's obvious. But there are other areas in which we can contribute. More specifically, as the brute bodily powers diminish, we're granted additional gifts and strengths in other areas. There's a great line from the Talmud on page 223 in text number 8. And I'll read it to you because it's short. If the elders advise you to destruct and the youth to construct, heed the counsel of the elders. Because destruction upon the advice of elders is constructive, and construction upon the advice of youth is destructive. In other words, we still have some value in life, folks. That's the good news. And I have a great clip to show you about the value of old age. It's a famous one. Ronald Reagan.
You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience. If I still have time, I might add, Mr. Truitt, I might add that it was Seneca or it was Cicero, I don't know which, that said, if it was not for the elders correcting the mistakes of the young, there would be no state.
Great. So you see, if you can no longer till the field, at least we can share with others our ideas and our insights about how best to do so. So during the older years, we should transition and spend more time in mentoring, sharing our wisdom, sharing our experience, because the senior citizen stage of life is not a time to sit back and to wait to die. Rather, we just have to recognize that every single day that God gives us is a gift, and it's meant to be utilized to the fullest. Retire means to retire, to get rid of the old tires and to put on new ones. Most importantly, during the older years, we have an opportunity to spend more time engaged in the most important productive endeavors of all, in terms of increasing our wisdom, increasing our knowledge, increasing our spirituality, connecting more deeply, all the things that we've been trying to do in the course of these lectures. And here it is summed up in these slides. You can volunteer, you can mentor, you can study Torah, do whatever you like, but make it worthwhile. And that, good people, brings us therefore to the end of our 6-week course. And now we're going to do something very special. To help us get a perspective of the journey that we have traveled together, I'm going to play you the key points summaries from each of the previous 5 lessons. And then at the end of that, the key points summaries for tonight's 6th lesson. After that, we'll have a short discussion, and I'll conclude with a few brief words. Now, you may want to keep a pencil or pen handy as we go through these videos, and make a note of the ideas that for you hit home, because we're going to discuss them afterwards. Okay? Now, when you're all ready, I will take us through to the first of our videos, and then successively all the way through to all the others.
Lesson 1. Demystifying Death. 1. The awareness of our mortality and the resulting natural fear of death influence many elements of our psyche, behavior, and life choices. Our perspective on death influences multiple areas of our lives. 2. The neshama, human soul, the true essence of the human being, is eternal. It precedes the body and continues to exist after the body is gone.
This is very
While still in heaven, it does not desire to descend into a body.
Please
And
all
when
mute.
the time of death arrives, it resumes its native spiritual state. 3. The fact that the briefest spiritual experience of the next world is more pleasurable than all of this world does not diminish the reality that even a brief stay in this world is more important than all of the next. Therefore, Jewish law gives precedence to preserving life over nearly every mitzvah. 4. This perspective allows us to appreciate and value life without fear of death. 5. While our corporeal needs and endeavors die with the body, our soul-focused aspirations and actions live on eternally. Thus, when we live and identify with eternal values, our current life continues even after the body's demise. Lesson 1. Demystifying Death. Lesson 2. Taking Leave. 1. Nefesh and Ruach are two of the soul's components. After death, the Nefesh remains with the body, while the Ruach disengages and ascends to Gan Eden, paradise. 2. Once the Ruach is no longer limited to material existence, it's more accessible to all who wish to connect to it. Thus, when a person dies, our ability to spiritually connect with him or her is stronger and deeper than before. 3. Though the Nefesh remains in the grave, it retains a connection with the higher levels of the soul. The gravesite is thus a portal where we can communicate with departed souls and ask them to intercede before God on our behalf. 4. Over the course of a lifetime, the soul and body integrate and bond. Their separation at death is therefore painful for the soul. 5. The soul departs the body in stages. These stages correspond to the prescribed periods of mourning. When we mourn, we are mourning not only for the deceased, but also with the deceased. 6. Dignity and sensitivity are the underlying principles that guide the care of a corpse and its preparation for burial. This is because even after death, the body retains its special status of having been the container for the soul. 7. Burial is of highest priority in Jewish tradition and culture. When God takes a person's soul, we are tasked to return the body to the place from which God fashioned it. 8. Burial affirms two fundamental Jewish beliefs. A. Our bodies aren't ours. They belong to God. And B. There will be a resurrection of the dead in the Messianic era. Lesson 3. The Mourning After. 1. Everyone reacts to and deals with grief differently. No two people are psychologically alike, and no two circumstances of death and bereavement are the same. 2. It is a mitzvah to mourn the loss of a loved one. Processing a loss is critical to the healing process, and this is accomplished by Shiva, a mandatory period of grieving. 3. The Torah validates and encourages mourning, but only for a prescribed period of time, after which the mourner is enjoined to transition back to normal life. 4. Some ideas that give a mourner the strength to move on. A. The knowledge that the soul lives on and is not diminished by death. B. It is never too late to mend or improve our relationship with the deceased. Though our physical relationship has ended, we can still give him or her spiritual gifts. C. Life is a deposit, and God decides when to give it and when it must be returned. D. For this soul and its unique mission, this constituted a full life. 5. It is a mitzvah to comfort mourners. The most basic principle of comforting a mourner is simply being there. Our presence offers comfort and lessens the loneliness that often accompanies mourning. Lesson 4. Where we go. 1. God's rewards and punishments are natural consequences of our actions. 2. When we do mitzvot, we forge an intimate relationship with God. In the afterlife, our souls experience the effects of our actions, our relationship with God. This is the greatest possible pleasure, and is also known as paradise, Gan Eden. 3. At times, a soul cannot enter paradise immediately, for its inappropriate actions in this world diminished its capacity to experience spiritual pleasures. Gehinnom, a painful yet cleansing process, is temporary. Every soul ultimately reaches paradise. 4. In Gan Eden, the soul constantly ascends to higher levels. Good deeds performed in a person's memory, including the recital of Kaddish, elevate the soul to higher levels that it cannot attain on its own. 5. What we do here and now is more important than the pleasures or pain of the afterlife. Living in order to receive rewards in the next world, or to avoid heavenly punishment, distracts our focus from where it belongs, increasing goodness and godliness in this world. Lesson 5. Where we go again. 1. Adam possessed the Jewish master soul that ultimately branched out into the 600,000 souls that received the Torah at Mount Sinai. All subsequent Jewish souls are offshoots of these soul roots. 2. The 600,000 primary souls were each given a part of the world to perfect through fulfillment of the 613 mitzvot. When a soul accomplishes its mission, it itself also gains rectification and elevation. 3. Every root soul must also study each of the Torah's 4 layers of teaching and uncover its unique part in Torah. 4. Few, if any, of the original souls completed all 613 mitzvot, nor the required study during their original lifetimes. Reincarnation provides souls with additional opportunities to complete their missions and the rectification of the world and themselves. 5. When a person dies, all the refined elements of their soul return to heaven. A new soul, built from the elements that were left unrectified, is then grafted from the stem soul and returned to this world. 6. As a general rule, our souls are reincarnations, but it is impossible to be conscious of or to accurately sense the experiences of our previous lifetimes. 7. Clues to the nature of our soul's unique task in this world can be gleaned from A. Our strengths and passions, B. Our weaknesses and struggles, and C. Our unique life circumstances. 8. The Kabbalistic view of reincarnation does not deny us our personal identity. Each of us is a complete and unique individual who is simultaneously and integrally linked to a far greater reality. Reincarnation ascribes greater importance to our existence and provides each of us a unique role within the overall human mission. Lesson 6. Life is short-ish. 1. Our exploration of death and the afterlife through the Torah's lens reduces our fear and unease, allowing us to consider our mortality without panic. 2. Some believe that because we eventually die, nothing is overly important. But Judaism insists that because we die, each moment of life is of supreme importance and should be devoted to matters of eternal relevance. Considering our mortality motivates us to focus on what really matters. 3. Our natural illusion of immortality spurs us to consider time as dispensable. We care more about wasted money than wasted time. Reflecting on life's finitude replaces this illusion with an urgency to take advantage of each moment. 4. We are designed to be productive beings. Retirement is not a Jewish concept. As our brute powers wane, we should transition to mentoring, sharing our wisdom and experience, etc. 5. Before the sin of the tree of knowledge, the body was the soul's extension, and their desires were synced. Sin destroyed that dynamic, causing spiritual death, the misalignment of body and soul. Physical death is an outgrowth of spiritual death. 6. We rectify spiritual death by realigning everything with its purpose, ignoring the superficial layers of a thing, its body, and instead focusing on its inner truth and purpose, soul. Upon completing this rectification, physical death will no longer be part of the human condition.
So you'll probably notice that the last part of that we didn't actually cover in the course. We had some choices over there, and I elected not to deal with that because I think we'll come back to that in another course. Well, it's difficult to believe that we went through all of that over the past 6 weeks. I hope that as you were looking at particularly some of the earlier ones, you didn't have the feeling I've never seen this before. But it's all there, of course, in the archive. Each one of the courses were recorded, and you can go back to any of them at any time, together with your workbooks, etc., and refresh yourself on anything that should you wish to. I'd like to ask you now whether, having been through that Cook's tour of the past 6 weeks, whether there are any aha moments that spoke to you during the course, and if there are any takeaways for your lives as a result of this course. And I'd invite you simply to share some of your thoughts and some of your feelings.
I think. Okay, after you, Denise.
Thank you. Okay, so I've experienced being close to death through serious illness, actually 3 times, and more recently with acute cellulitis, as people know. And so what resonated with me, particularly tonight, is the fact that you must make your life meaningful and live it. You know, you do not know when things can suddenly alter. And I think that the precept that you live, you know, you've got to live life to the full, but obviously live it responsibly and with meaning. You know, sometimes I think personally people think I'm a little bit sugar because, you know, I loved life so much. And I think that anybody that's had a brush, and I thank Hashem, you know, that I'm the Almighty, that I'm here, may feel the same way as me. And I want to say to everybody that I happened to see Laurie Wiseman walking with Brett today, and it was lovely to see him looking so well. So there you go.
Thank you very much, Denise. Okay, was that Loretta was going to speak or someone else?
Yes, I found today's lesson the most encouraging. My sister and I were brought up very much that we should never waste our life. We should, and my mother's mantra was that you had to be good to everybody. And I think today's lesson, you know, reinforced that, and was a little more encouraging than some of the earlier lessons, which I found sometimes a little depressing. But I agree with not retiring. When retirement sort of came upon me, I I try to do everything to keep every minute busy. I never sit and do nothing. And that's the way we were brought up, and it was just always completely natural to us.
Thank you. Estelle, you have your hand up?
Yes, yes, I have one comment and I have one question. The same way that you said Steve Jobs was a rabbi, I think by the same criteria, so was Irvin Yalom. I've always been fascinated by an activity that he has where he draws a line, and at the one side of the line he labels birth, and at the other end he labels death. And he used to ask his clients to place themselves where they thought they were on that line, and then to ask them these questions. You know, this is what you've got left. What are you actually going to focus on? And it's really interesting to see the rabbinical and the biblical roots of that. My question, I wondered, Rabbi, if in times when people didn't live as long as they live now, perhaps in previous centuries, when perhaps there was a funeral going on in the village or the street much more regularly, do you think that people had a different attitude to death?
No, actually, I don't. I think people are people, and we've always, you know, in every generation, we've taken that span of time as the normal, and we've behaved, I think, in exactly the same way. But difficult to answer still, because I wasn't there at the time, but that's what I suspect. By the way, I can't see all of your hands up because I can't see all of the screens because we're on Spotlight, so I don't have gallery. But I can see that Ronald Bayland has his hand up at the moment.
Yes,
So
Shlomo.
let's hear from you.
Shlomo, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you very much. It's been very, very interesting. I'd like to ask you, you were speaking about the currency of schmaltz versus diamonds. And my question to you would be, what is the best currency for a good afterlife?
Good deeds.
Good
making
deed.
Making a difference to the world in some way that is tangible. And that means, of course, it can be in lots of different ways, you know, by inventing something quite spectacular, but most of us don't do that sort of thing, which brings great benefit to the world through some invention. But for most of us, it is human interactions, the ability to put a smile on people's face each day, to be caring, to have a positive influence on the little sphere of influence that surrounds us. We operate in quite a small little part of the world, each of us. Even, you know, though we might travel from time to time, but most of us operate in a fairly confined kind of perimeter. And to make a difference within that space, I think, is what you can best take with to the world to come.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
About, do you think that the COVID period we've just gone through or going through has had one positive effect, and that is it does bring the imminence of death or the fleetingness of life into perspective, and maybe it has helped some people to focus on the things you're talking about, that is to realize how easily life can be removed, and therefore how much we need to do while we are still free and breathing, and even close brushes with death can have that effect.
I would like to think that would be the effect of COVID. I doubt if it will be. I think human beings will go back to the way we were. The default is always the most powerful position. Change is very, very lasting. Change is very difficult to implement in our lives.
Denise Pincherson's trying to speak, but you need to unmute yourself, Denise. I don't think you've managed yet.
Why don't you put your question up on, or your statement up on chat, Denise, if you can't get to unmute. Anybody else like to say anything?
Could I make a comment?
Yes.
Please, Rabbi Shlomo. And thank you so much for the most wonderful, I'm going to really miss Wednesday evening next week. I just feel now with modern culture, there's a kind of a lack of that somehow, you know, people are sort of trying to keep young and trying to look young, and there's almost like it's very difficult sometimes for young people to see different generations and grandparents, and there's such a sort of desire to keep young and look young that I don't know, I can't really kind of put it into words exactly, but I sometimes think it's difficult for people nowadays to see, to recognize that people are getting older, because everybody's trying to avoid it so much, and that's another kind of denial.
Yes, we live in a young world. I remember summer a couple of years ago taking a walk on Primrose Hill on a Shabbat afternoon. It was a lovely summer's day, and the park was crowded, and I looked around, and with a horrifying thought, I realized that I was probably the oldest person there. Everybody else seemed to be very young. But I think the point we're trying to make tonight is that we need not to be afraid of growing old, and certainly not to be diminished in our own eyes, even though it is a young world and an energetic world. And of course, we want to remain young at heart. We want to remain energetic at heart. We want to be, as much as we can, young grandparents if we can, to have fun with our grandchildren if we're blessed with them. All of that is right, but at the same time, we should not be afraid of growing old and being old. We have to grow into our own skins at every stage of our lives.
Can I ask where actually did the concept of 70 years and 10 actually become a thing?
King David.
Okay.
King David died at the age of 70, yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, Rabbi Shlomo, I just want to say that through listening to tonight, particularly, it's made me much less fearful of death. I understand far more, I think, of certain aspects of what to expect, and that's quite reassuring in many ways. It's taken away a lot of the, I don't suppose I think about death very often, I must be honest. I have done, it's been with a certain amount of fear, and I don't want to go there, but actually I feel much more comfortable with the notion of it now and not as fearful.
Right. Thank you, Francis. That's part of the object of the course. We spoke at the beginning of tonight that it's that being able to face death is actually helps to liberate us in life, and that's what we wanted to achieve. Anyone else wanted to say anything?
I suppose I don't have a fear of death as such, but I suppose along with a lot of other people, I fear a painful way of
Yes, of course.
death. I mean, that's the biggest fear, not death, because for whatever we've learned on the 6 weeks of course, the 6-week course, it sounds quite interesting to go to the next world. I mean, you know, wow, I never thought of it like that.
And we go back.
And yeah, we might get a chance to get back as well. And maybe I'll come back in the shape that I've always wanted, or of all the things I always wanted in the next life. But no, I think the biggest fear is probably, I'm sure I'm not the only one, how we're going to die and how you accept those last few minutes of dying if you're conscious.
Yeah, well, you
I
pray
mean, you
for
must have seen people dying, and I have seen my brother dying, but he was sort of asleep when he died. But have you seen anybody who 1 minute spoke to you and the next minute died and knew they were going to die?
Yes, I have, I'm afraid. Yes, I have. All right, let me offer some words by way of conclusion for tonight. You know, our sense of identity, who we are and how we fit in really depends on a number of very deep awarenesses that are buried in our subconscious. Now, we carry these things with us always. It's summed up in two words. It's all the stuff which lies beneath the surface when we assert, I am. I am. What lies in those words, beneath those words? I know my name. I know the names of my immediate family. I can picture them in my mind, both of those who are alive and those who've already have passed away. I know something about my past, both in terms of my forebearers, my family history, the history of my people, the people to which I belong. I know the place in which I live. I can picture it in my mind, room by room. I can picture the home that I grew up in, room by room, piece by piece. I can picture the streets and shops in my immediate environment. I have a complete and total consciousness and awareness of a whole lot of things which are there just beneath the surface in my subconsciousness. And I call this the furniture of my mind. It's hugely important. All of that furniture is hugely important to my sense of self and to my sense of well-being. Take any of it away, as tragically happens in dementia, and we're set completely adrift. We've lost all sense of self and all sense of belonging. So this helps us to have an idea, all of this stuff, that's the furniture of our world, of our mind, of our inner mind. It's there all the time. We don't even have to think about it. What we've tried to do in these 6 sessions that we've had is to add another dimension to the furniture of our mind. The awareness of a spiritual life, a spiritual world. And we've had just a tantalizing peek at how it functions. The awareness of that other dimension lifts us beyond the smallness and the containment of our finite lives. And it gives us a much bigger, fuller, more augmented sense of self. If I think of myself not just as a finite life occupying this world for a period of time, however long it's going to be, however long God grants it, and I think of myself in terms of my soul and my other life and the place that I come from, the place that I'm going to, it totally expands my perspective, my sense of identity. My whole sense of my being has to change. I see myself as a soul primarily occupying a body, not as just a body with a soul locked in it. It's an inversion of my whole Weltanschauung. It's a total change of perspective. It's a quantum leap in my perspective. So if we were to think very deeply about these ideas that we've studied, if you're to really contemplate them deeply and hold these ideas in your minds, it must radically change our perceptions of ourselves. And if we were totally and absolutely honest with ourselves, it would lead us to lead a different kind of life, at least for the rest of our lives. We would have to be changed human beings. Our values would have to change, our lifestyle would have to change, the things which we do would have to change, the things we occupy ourselves with might have to change. All of that would flow from everything which we've learned. And you know what the reality is? We're not going to change. Why are we not going to change? Because change is hard. Because actually most of us are more or less satisfied with who we are and with our lives. We're in this particular groove, and that's the way we live, and there's circumstances around us, and even if we wanted to change, the people around us wouldn't want us, wouldn't appreciate the way in which we change. So for all kinds of reasons, we're not going to make those radical changes that would really be demanded by the implications, by the knowledge of a course of this kind. We will remain, for the most part, unchanged. So does that mean we've wasted our time? That it's just been a nice exercise with some nice new ideas we've studied? Not at all. Because for most of us, the new knowledge that we've acquired will at the very least give us an awareness of this other dimension. We will have a sense of its implications even though we don't want to implement them. But if this new awareness, even without radical change, alters the way in which we think about ourselves, or gives us a new perspective of mortality, or helps us to become more spiritually aware human beings with an enhanced sense of the preciousness of every moment of life, then to my mind, that makes the entire course worthwhile. And so I invite you, as we leave this course, to ask yourselves the question, what has this actually meant to you? And what does this new awareness of this other spiritual dimension mean? This new furniture which has entered into your life, which must change the way in which you see yourself. What implications does it have for your life and for your awareness of self, for your identity, the way in which you see yourself and your place in this world? And what implications will it have for the way in which you all want to spend your lives from this moment on? And so until the next journey that we can take together, thank you all very much for your participation in this course. I hope that you've gained from it. I've enjoyed certainly giving it. I've enjoyed Wednesday nights. They're hard. They take preparation, of course. But as everything in life, the more you prepare, the better it is. And I invite you, therefore, to do your own preparations in terms of looking back over the course and getting as much out of it as you can. And with that, I bid you all good night and au revoir and hitraot, and hope you'll join me on the next journey that we take together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shlomo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend.
Thank you. Very, very inspiring and enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Very meaningful and lovely to share it with everybody.
Isn't it?
It's been very sensitive.
Right.
It's
We-
really been a wonderful feeling behind the
Yeah.
whole group. Yeah, thank you.
It's so good to feel that sense of community.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
And thank you to my sisters who took the journey with me.
Who's the other one? I know Lydia's your sister.
Yeah, here's the other one, Ruth Sushi, waving.
Oh, Ruth. Yes, I've seen her a lot on
Yeah,
this
she's my baby
Oh,
sister.
Nice.
Fantastic. That's the wonder of Zoom and all this remote learning. It's amazing. It's lovely to share your family, to meet your family. Be well.
Yeah, all the very best to everyone.
Thank you, Shlomo.